Hello everyone and welcome back to Pure Cut Creations. Today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting a handle on that African blade that I gilded in my last episode. Now if you haven't seen that episode yet, please be sure to click on the little card that's going to pop up in your corner and go ahead and watch that. So what I'm doing right now is I start by marking out where I want to grind off on these nice black ebony scales by matching it up to my blade and tracing it with a pencil. As you probably noticed, this material is not going to make it the entire length of my handle. This is alright though, as I actually plan on making this handle out of 3 different materials, and I make sure to make a straight line from the top to the bottom of my ebony. This will make it a lot easier to line up with my next piece of the handle material later on. I trace up my lines directly off the blade, so I'm making sure to leave a little bit extra meat on it when I go through cutting with the scroll saw and when I grind it on the grinder. Normally I have a lot more sawing to do on the bandsaw before taking it to the grinder, but this piece of ebony is so thin and small that the grinder takes care of it really fast anyway. All the time I spent hand sanding the blade has left it a little rounded towards the base, so I take a few moments to fix that up with my grinder so my scales can lay flat against it without showing any gaps. This is really important as, you know, obviously if you're going to have gaps, it's not going to look as professional later on when it's all finished. Then it was on to the next step, gluing. To increase the adhesion of my adhesive, I decided to scrape up the side of my blade with a file. I was very careful that I did not touch any part that was not going to be covered by my handle. I wanted it to be sturdy because I didn't plan on using any pins in this blade or the handle, and I knew creating those scrapes would give the glue something to really bite onto and create a strong bond. I decided to use a 5-minute epoxy mostly because I was familiar with it as I used it on my previous 3 knives. After I get all of my glue mixed up, I spread a thin layer on my knife and slap on the handle. I line it up as precisely as I can, making sure the side next to the blade was in the right spot because that's going to be a lot harder to fix later as opposed to the other side, which I can fix up, and it's really going to be quite simple to do that, as I won't have to worry about scratching my show side of my blade while I'm doing it. I wipe off the excess and then I spread some glue on the other side. I really planned on doing these one at a time so I could, line it up with the part of the handle on the other side that was glued properly, but I poured out way too much epoxy and I didn't want it to go to waste, so I just threw on the other side of the handle and clamped it, and then I crossed my fingers hoping that it came out pretty decent. Alright everyone, so this is where we're at. Currently, I have the black ebony onto my knife. The next step is, if you can see there, it's not exactly even on both sides, so I have to even that up, and that's what we're going to be doing now. So squaring this up took way longer than I had predicted it would, mostly because I underestimated how difficult it would be to flatten this handle while working around the tang. I could only grind a small section at once, and there was a lot that I had to fix up from me trying to square everything up with a saw and a file at my house before just giving up and deciding I would take it to the grinder at my grandparents' house to make sure this was done right. Unfortunately, fixing this up meant grinding away some extra epoxy that was left on the tang and cleaning up excess bits of handle that were still there. After spending a long time on the grinder, barely touching the knife to it, and then just a few short minutes with the file, it was on to the next step. After squaring up the ebony, it was time for my second handle material. I wanted to make a thin strip of brass around the handle to separate the other 2 materials and to complement the gilding on the blade. I started by matching up my tang with the brass and then drilling some holes that I can connect by cutting out the middle section with a scroll saw. The scroll saw made very quick work of that, and it still needed some filing to get it to match up to the tang perfectly. Filing was a lot of tedious work, but luckily this brass was so thin that it went by really quickly. Once I had the fit that I wanted, it was time to mix up some epoxy and smear it onto the knife to get it all stuck together. Then I just let it hang out in a couple of clamps for a little bit to cure. This next piece was pretty difficult for me. It did not take as long as squaring up the black ebony, and it did not take as much focus as actually engraving the blade, but it was something completely new to me. I had to get this beautiful slice of scrap mahogany onto the end of this tang. I started by laying out my lines and drilling into the mahogany with 2 very deep holes. Now, I would normally wrap my drill bit with a small piece of tape to indicate what depth I wanted to drill to, but I needed to go a bit further with this than my drill bit actually allowed when fully seated in the drill. So I pulled it out of my drill ever so slightly to match the depth of the tang, and then I drilled as straight as I possibly could down into it. This scrap of mahogany was pretty short, and I didn't want to make a new piece, so there was really no room for error in making these holes straight. If I ended up going in at a slight angle, I would have to sand the end of the mahogany until it was once again perpendicular with the hole, which would allow the brass to line up perfectly when seated into the back of the tang. However, I did manage to drill them straight, which is pretty surprising for me. I'm not very good at drilling holes or screwing in screws straight, so I was quite proud of myself. After I got the holes drilled, I had to hog out the material in between the holes. Now this is normally very easy to do with a milling machine, so I figured if I just wiggled the drill back and forth, I could become the milling machine I always dreamed to be. But long story short, I am no milling machine, and I ended up going slightly to the left and slightly to the right, leaving the thinnest spike of material in the middle where my tang had to go. So I took out the hand files and I filed down that spike and squared up the sides to make sure it fit on the tang tightly before I went to gluing. Now I've been rambling quite a bit, so you probably saw all of this already, but just to say it again for you all, the gluing was as simple as mixing parts A and B together and spreading it on to the knife and throwing it into a clamp overnight. The next day was where the fun began though, because I was able to take this chunky handle over to the sander and make a ton of mahogany, brass, and ebony dust to make it the shape and size I wanted it to be. Now, I cannot stress how long this took on my small little belt sander. And I had to keep adjusting and rotating the handle so it didn't burn, which made me have to constantly reassess what shape I wanted the side that I was currently working on to be. Then I had to make sure both sides matched up perfectly, and then had to make sure it matched up with the shape I was going for perfectly. But with that all being said, there are very few things that are more satisfying than holding a finished knife in your hand as the wood dust settles around you in the shop. Overall, I really like this knife. I do see the flaws in it, but overall, this was really a big challenge for me. This is the 4th knife I've ever done, and it's the first one that I've done alone. The other 3 that I did were with my grandpa, who is a really good knife maker. He's been doing it almost his entire life, and I really appreciate everything that he's taught me up to this point, and I think that's why knife making is so special to me and why I really look forward to continuing this in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button. Maybe leave a comment if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them as well. I have some links to my other social media down in the description. And also, don't forget to subscribe. You know, it really helps the channel out a lot. It helps me out a lot. And we're still a really small channel here, so the more subscribers we get, obviously, you know, the more people are going to be able to see these videos that I make. If you'd like to see my other videos, please be sure to look at my channel. And if you want to see my next video coming out, which I'm looking to do more knife videos, so don't forget to, you know, hit that little bell if that's the type of stuff you want to see. I also do a lot of glass etching and wood carving, but like I said, I want to step more into the realm of knife making because I really do enjoy it quite a bit. And with that, thank you for watching, and as always, have a wonderful day.